This lesson, we're going to be looking at the table class within Docs. So log into the Google account and go over to Drive or other ways to make a new document, select Doc and create a brand new document. And we're going to be using the bound script to test this. So we'll call this test 1 and we'll call it tables. So this is just a blank document and we're going to do everything with the Google Apps script. So under the Tools tab, select Script Editor, open up the Script Editor. And I'll make this larger so it's easier to read the code. And of course you can keep it at whatever the size it was. And for the project, and I'll just call it Tables Tester. Just give it a name of Tables Tester. So we've got a completely blank document and using a bound script. So first of all, let's do one make table function. So we need to select the document that we want to use. So selecting the main document, and we can also select the body as well, that so we can interact with it. So using the document app class, and just get the active document. And you can also get the body within the same statement, or you can separate it out and do another variable name for body. And then now using the document app, let's get the body of the document. And within the log, so the logger log output the body object. Just to make sure that we've got the body object, in addition to getting the body object, we want to also set the permissions so that we can interact with the doc. So run the make table function. It's going to ask us to accept permissions to access the newly created document. And first off, we're going to create a table. And then after we create the table, we're going to select the table from the existing tables and then output the table content and update the table content using Google Apps Script. So we've got what's known as the document body section. So that means that we've got the active body and we're ready to update some content into it. So whatever we want for the content of the cells, this can just be an array. And then within the array, let's create a loop. So for let x equals 0, and then how many columns do we want? So let's do 4 columns and then increment x by 1. So what we're constructing is going to be the array that we're going to be placing within the table object. And within this array, it's going to need another array, and this is going to be the row content. So each row is its own array within the array object that we're going to be adding and appending the table to. So you can give it a name of row, and this as well can just be another array as we can deposit content into it. And that means that we'll have another loop. So this is going to be y equals 0. And then how many columns that we want to have. So this is creating 4 rows, and this is going to be creating the columns. So for the columns, let's do 5 columns. And then increment y by 1. And then within the row, we're going to push into the array and push in whatever the value of y is. So within the log, once we create the row, let's output it into the log. And then after we create the row, what we want to do to the row is we want to append it to the array. So that's the main array that's sitting outside. So within the array, we're going to push in whatever the content of the row is. And then lastly, within the log, let's output the contents of the array, and we'll see what content we're going to be placing within the table. So essentially, it's just going to be the values of y that are going to be in the table. And we can also concatenate it together. So let's do a space in between. So we can do the value of x and then plus y. So that can be our string value that we're adding in, or include a dash there. So run the code, and that's going to be the basic table that we're constructing. So this table is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of content, and each row is going to have 5 columns of content. So what we want to do is we want to add this into the body. So right now our document doesn't have a table. So take the body object and use the append table, and this is going to create a table from the contents of that multidimensional array. So run that one more time, and that constructs the table, and every time you run it, it's going to construct a brand new table with the same data. So that gives us 3 tables on the page. So now that we've created some tables, what if we want to add content to the existing tables? So we need to select the tables from the page. So let's create a new function. And what this is going to do is this is going to add to the tables. So creating a function, we'll just call it adder. And again, we're going to select the document body. And this time we'll just do it within the one statement. So using the document app, get the active document, and then let's get the body from the active document. So this is going to allow us to select the body object. And we want to get all of the tables from the body object. So create another object, call it tables, and then we want to get the tables from the body object. So that way we can get the tables as separate objects, and you can also loop through each one. And this is going to be each individual table that we're looping through, and output that using the log. So we'll output the table objects. And these are going to be the 3 tables that we have. So let's run the function. And it looks like it's a little slow today saving. And this is currently what our document looks like. And what this function will do is it will select the body of the active document. And then from the body object, it will loop through and pick up any tables that are existing. And once we do find tables that are existing, we're outputting the table object into the logger to make sure that the table exists. And then afterwards, we're going to append content to the table. And let's set up the content that we want to append. So if, for instance, the content that we want to append is going to be within an array format, and it looks like we got to reload the site. So let's recreate that. So the content that we want to append, if it's an array format, so we've got A, B, C, D, and E. So we saw that if we are adding and creating a new table, it does look for this array format, and then we can just do in a body append table. So initially, if we create a function that's going to make a table, so this will always add to the table. So if we have our body object, and then we've got the content that we want to append, and if this is requiring a multi-dimensional array, so this is an array within an array. That's why I wrapped it with the square brackets. And save that. So let's run the maker. And what this is going to do is this is just going to append a brand new table. And that's not what we want here, is that we want to add to the existing tables. So let's try running adder. And we get the 4 tables because now we've just created a new one. And so ideally we want to append this data to the existing table. So the way to do that is that you need to select the table row. So this is going to return back the table row value. And from the table object, we can append the table row. So what this does is this is actually going to create an object in itself that then we can append cells to, cell content. So we don't have a way to just take all of these values and simply append it within an array format, unless we're creating a brand new table as we did within the maker function. So in this case, we need to loop through the contents of the array and add rows individually. So now we can take the table row and append table cell. So this is going to append the cell contents. And if you do something like this, if you append an array, and you run the code, you're going to get this type of error that the number don't match the signature method within the app. And even if you wrap it within an array, this is still not going to work. You're still going to run into that same error because the parameters don't match. So within the append table cell, it's expecting a string value to be appended into it. So this needs to be a string value. So let's try that, append table row. And now it's appended each one of the tables with this string value. So initially you might be wondering, okay, well, what if I do another string value here? And they do have an example of how that works. So it is expecting a string value, and that's why the array won't work, because it is expecting a string value. So if we save that and if we run it, it's going to still have the mismatch. So it's only expecting the one parameter, and we need to add them individually. So if we want to add a whole bunch of rows to that table, or a bunch of columns to that table row, we could take cells, use for each, and then get the contents of each cell, and that way we can append the cell contents as a string value into each one of the columns. So that would be the correct way to append a table. So run the adder, and now you see that we are appending the table with the correct number of cells. So it is in line, and then these are still the table objects. So even if you were to loop through the tables, so creating another function, call it table data, and get the body, and then we need to get the tables as well. Or you could do this with just one function, where you do the get tables, and let's call that variable tables. And then for tables, we can loop through each one of those. And then for the table itself, you can get some data back from the table object. So you've got all of this, where you can even remove rows if you want. You can insert a table row. So that's going to require an integer value. For the row value, you can get the row, so whatever row it's currently on, and log, and output the value of temp. And get row is expecting a row index value. So we can get the index value here and add in the index value. So it's expecting an integer value here to retrieve back which row to receive back. So you don't actually have to loop through the rows, just specify which row you want to retrieve back. So from table 1, and this one actually isn't going to have enough rows, so we're probably going to throw an error here. But this is just an example of the table row. And once we get the table row, from here we can edit as text, and then get text. So just a method, it's going to return back the object. And actually, let me put it in the wrong function. So once we've got the temp object, we can get the text from the temp object. And let's run that one more time. So that returns back the contents as text. And then whatever we want to do with it, we can do with that text. So specifying the index, and then we're getting the text from the specific index value. So this one has the index of 0, 1, 2, and then this one has whatever the index value of 3 is. So returning back the content of the tables. You also have an option when you're adding in a row into the table. You can specify the row. So if we do a table row over here, and then use the table object, and then insert table row, if we want to insert it after the second row, we can insert the content as the second row. And I'll just add in a 2 so that we can distinguish between the content. And let's run the adder function one more time. And then let's take a look and see where we've added. So we were successfully able to add in content on the second row of each one of the tables. And of course, if you want, you can also specify the table specifically. So you can select that. You don't have to loop through the tables because this is array based. So if there's a particular table that you want to append to, you can take the table and use whatever its array value is or index value. So table 1, and do insert table row. So we need to specify which row we want to insert into. And then the content that we want to insert, and we'll just append the one table cell. For the example that we're able to insert some content into here. So let's run adder one more time. And this time it's only inserting on that specific table that we specified by its index value in the example. So we used with an index value of 1, and we inserted within the table 1. So that inserted that content here within that index table there. So that's how you can select existing tables, update content within existing tables, get the content from existing tables, and update the table content. And then as well, you can also remove rows if needed. So let's take table 2 and select remove row and whatever index value that we want to remove out. So if we want to remove out row 2, and let's run the code. So now it's removed out, it's hard to tell here, but it's removed out some content from one of the rows. So go ahead, try it out, and check out all the different things that you can do within the table class using Google Apps Script. In this lesson, we're going to be setting up a couple of docs, so copying content from one doc into the other using a function to copy the content. So go ahead and open up within the drive, and then new, create a brand new doc. So we're going to be using a bound script. So this is going to be our first document. And this is going to be where we're going to use the template document and add in some content. And then within the tools menu, select the script editor, and this is going to open up the bound script editor to connect to the script content. And from here, we're going to create a function and give the project a name. So I'm giving a name of copy doc. So we're going to create a function that's going to run the copy doc content. And I'll make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So this function is going to need some content, and let's also go ahead and we're going to create another new document. So you can create new documents from within the document itself. So select a new, or you can go over to your drive and create a document. So this is going to be the second document, and this is going to be where the output is going to be. So that's the output content. So we're copying this content into the second document with the output content. And we're going to be using a script that's bound within the first template document in order to accomplish this. So we need to select our source content. So using const and set up the source document. Using the document app service, open, and we can actually, because we're bound, or we can use the open by ID. So in case you want to have a standalone script, you can do that as well. So in this case, we're going to just use the open by ID. So selecting the document ID, and that you can get within the URL of the document itself. So select the ID, and I'll set up separate variables so that we can change the IDs if needed. So this is the ID of the source document, the template document. And we can just use the variable name within the ID. And we also need to have the target document. So this is going to be the target document. And I'll set up a spot there for the target ID. So we need to select the ID from the second document that we just created. And can add that one in there. And then using the document app class, the same as we did for the source document, we're going to select the target document by its ID. So this will give us both of the document objects and allow us to interact with the content from those documents. So what we want to do is we want to run the script at this point so that we can accept the permissions where we can select access to both of those documents. So we're just running the execution, and we should get the pop-up window now for selecting and being able to review the permissions for those documents. So go ahead and go through the process of accepting the permissions, so allowing the permissions to interact. And if you, within the execution log, you shouldn't see any errors. So that's a good sign, and now we're ready to get the content from the target document. So this is going to be whatever the document body is going to be. So we can just give it a name of body, and then use the target doc contents and get the body object. So now we're ready to write into the body, and actually I'm going to rename this to tBody for the target body. And now let's also select the source content. So we want to loop through all of the elements that are contained within the source. So let's first do that where we're going to create a loop. So getting the source content, so source body, and I'll just uppercase this body as well to be consistent. So we use sBody to get the source body. So source document object, get the body contents of the source document. And using the logger, let's log out what we have for the source body. And if you want to see the text, you can edit as text. So let's see what we get when we run the code. So we get the text object. And if we want to actually get the text that's contained within there, we can get the text content. So that will return back all of the text that's contained within that first object. Also within the body itself, so within the sBody, we have a number of different properties that we can get. So we can get the number of children. So that will tell us how many children are available within the body object. So it looks like there's 6 there. So we can loop through the children that are available. So the get number of children returns back retrieves the number of children that that particular object has. And we can use this value of 6 to create a loop to loop through the contents of that current object. So let's create a for loop and then loop through while I is less the number of children from the body, and then we'll increment I by 1. And now let's log out into the log each one of the children, so we'll get it by its child index. So using the source body, get child, and using the value of I as the index value for the child that we want to select. And now run, and we'll see what, so we get a number of paragraphs there. So as well, we only have 3 with content in them. The other 3 are blank. So these are all paragraph objects. So let's give the child a variable name. So we'll just call it L. So this will reference the child object and allow us to work with it using the variable of L. And now let's create a condition. Actually, before we do that, so console log and take the elements, and we're going to get the type. So get the type of content that it is, so that we can ensure that they're going to be paragraphs, as we're going to be copying over paragraphs. So the type is paragraph, and that's all capitalized. So using the same format, we can get the type, and we can make sure that it is a paragraph. And if it is a paragraph, if the type is paragraph, then that means that we want to add that paragraph type to the body of the target. So first, let's make a copy of the content. So new element that we're going to be creating, and taking the element object and using copy in order to make a duplicate of it. And you can also check it within the log service just to make sure that you do have the same object there, the element container. And so that gives us the same paragraphs that we saw earlier as we're running through for the content of the source. So the last step is to take the body of the target, and we're going to append a paragraph, and the contents of the paragraph that we're going to be appending is going to be coming from the new element object that we just created, that we just copied from the source. So let's see what happens with the output and go into the second document. And now we've got the content is copied. We can run it again, and it's going to make a second copy, so second set of content from the first source. So what we ideally want to do is we want to clear out that target element. So take the tBody, clear, and this will clear out the existing content. And then we can also append a paragraph and add some content in there to provide some context to it. So selecting the tBody once again and append a paragraph. So it's just going to be appending some text there, and type in the last update. And then we can add in a date or whatever object we want there to indicate that this is the last updated content. And let's separate it out by appending a horizontal rule as well. So now when we run the code, this should clear out the existing contents, add the last updated, so adding the heading information, and now whatever we change here is now going to get, whenever we run the code, is going to get now recreated here in the second document. So if we add in some list items, and I'm just going to go ahead and add in some list items, and we run the code, it's not actually going to copy the list items over, because remember, we are looking for just an element type of paragraph. So if you want to do list items and add that into the copy content, so that will look for the element type, and that's going to be list item. And then we can do the same thing where we copy the element object. We don't have to list it out, and we can append a list item. So that will append the list item object. So let's try running the code. And actually that should be lowercase. So now we're appending the list items. And notice it doesn't take the bullet points. So for those, we have to set the glyph type. So we'll just create this as list1. And then we can take the new list1 item, and we can set the glyph type. And when you set the glyph type, there's a number of different glyph types that are available. So you can get all of the glyph types by doing document app, and then selecting the glyph type object, and then selecting the property that you want to do. So there's bullet, there's hollow point, there's Latin lower, Latin upper, number, Roman lower, Roman upper, square, bullet. So you need to actually select the bullet type that you want to use. So you can do something like this, where it's a square bullet. And now you go down here and it's got the square bullets. So let's also add in a table, and then we'll copy over the table contents. So you do have to get each one of these different types here in order to copy the content, because we are looking for different types. So as you loop through, you can check to see if the element type is a table, and then if it is, then we make a copy of the object. And we don't need to have the callback on it. So within the tBody, instead of append list item, you can append a table. And then within the append table, all we have to do again, we have to just add in that element object that we're appending, that we've selected. So let's run the code. Go in here, and now we're updating and we're copying the content over from the previous document as it is being presented within that document. So even if you add more content and then run the script again, it's going to do the copy over of that existing content. And it is clearing out the document object each time, every time it runs. To use the logger as you're building out your application so that you can see the content being output into the log to ensure the different element types and element values that are contained within the selections. You can also use the logger log for debugging. So it gives you an indication as your script is running what type of content that you have, what you have access to, and then what you can do with that content that you've selected. So go ahead and try it out. And the source code is also included, so you can as well copy and paste. Don't forget to change your ID numbers for your documents so that you can create your own version of the code and run it within your own environment.